All right. Well, awesome. This is the kickoff of a new programming series that we have. So I am Lauren Schuler. I'm the Curriculum and Research Associate with Campus Vote Project. And tonight we are, like I said, kicking off Taking the Leap, which is going to be kind of a professional development series aimed at allowing our fellows to get information about what comes after graduation. And so tonight we're talking about graduate programs that our fellows or other undergraduates might be interested in moving forward. And so we have several speakers here to talk about different degree programs that might be helpful. And so I'm just going to do some brief introductions of our panelists. And since we have a small group, I think we'll stay in the main room and kind of talk about get into more details about each of those programs. So first we have Dr. Kappus. He is the Senior Director of Student Services in the College of Education at North Carolina State University. In this role, he provides leadership for all graduate student recruitment, mentoring, and success, and offers guidance to the Student Success and Advising Center to shape a vision for undergraduate student recruitment, academic advising, successful initiatives, co-curricular engagement, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. So welcome, Dr. Kappus. And then we also have Dr. Emily Sydnor. Dr. Sydnor is an associate professor of political science at Southwestern University in Texas. She specializes in political communication and political psychology, and her research focuses on incivility in the media, its interaction with individual psychological traits, and its influence on political behavior. She is also interested in the scholarship of teaching and learning, particularly assessment and community engaged learning. I know that she's also working a lot with our research collective and that kind of stuff. So thank you so much. Then we have Valencia Richardson. Valencia is legal counsel for voting rights at the Campaign Legal Center. She is a graduate of Georgetown University Law Center and Louisiana State University, where she worked as a student voting rights organizer for the Andrew Goodman Foundation, and she is also a published author. She also told me in the chat that she's having some internet issues, which is why her camera is off, but she is here and she'll be able to speak on information about getting a law degree and some of her other work. We also have Joey Wozniak. Joey is currently pursuing his Master's of Public Administration from the Harvard Kennedy School in Boston. He has extensive organizing experience from his days on campus at Mercer University, where he helped start SoCon Votes, and also with working with, I think, consulting firms. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but Mile 22 Associate and Night Impact. In addition, Joey was the first project director for Vote Early Day, which we've heard lots about. It's coming up this week, so that's pretty exciting. And then finally, we have Kassie Phebillo, who you all know and love as our curriculum and research manager with Campus Vote Project. But tonight she's going to be talking about her experience as a communication studies PhD candidate at the University of Texas at Austin, where she studies the intersection of political communication and higher education. And she said she will also talk about some of her work her graduate experience at Georgetown University. So, yes, go ahead. I don't know what you're pointing at. Oh, yes, sorry. We also have, I don't know how I forgot our other CVP colleague, but we have Landon Myers, who is our state coordinator for Michigan. Hold on, let me really quick just pull up in his bio. I know that he is going to be talking to us about the Masters of Public Policy, which is slightly different than an MPA degree. So it'll be good for him to talk about kind of, and he and Joey can talk about maybe the differences between the two degree programs. So sorry, Landon, I feel bad. I was trying to do these things, but so he received a BA in political science from Monmouth, and while at Monmouth, he led voter registration initiatives on campus and received an award from the New Jersey State New Jersey Secretary of State and he has his Master's of Public Policy degree from the Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy at the University of Michigan. So those are all of our speakers. So you can see that there's kind of a breadth of degree programs that we're going to be talking about tonight. So let's start it off with each of our panelists, speakers, talking a little bit about the degree program, give us an overview of the type of degree, learning outcomes, and skills that can be obtained with your degree. I think we'll just go in the order that I introduced y'all. So Dr. Kappus, if you want to start off.
Sure. Thank you, Campus Vote Project, for having me. It's really great to be here. Again, my name is Alex, pronouns he, him, his, and I serve as the Senior Director of Student Services at the College of Education at NC State University. I am tonight wearing the hat of representing master's and doctoral programs in the field of education. So for me, it's a very personal journey, right? I went to Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, where I studied political science. And I loved everything about my classroom experience there. But I also really loved everything that was happening outside of the classroom. That's really where I learned about the possibility of working on a college campus as a career. And so I ended up going straight into a master's program. I was at the crux of, do I go to law school or do I follow this itch of wanting to work on a college campus? I was particularly passionate about social justice, and I felt like education is a really great place to advance social justice. And so I went with my my heart and my gut, and I never looked back. Got my master's degree in college student development from the University of Georgia, and worked while I earned my degree. So I didn't actually have to pay a penny for my my master's degree. And then I've worked in various administrative roles in 4 different states. My wife works in public health, so I've had to kind of follow her around the country. But working in higher ed, it's meant I have basically guaranteed employment because there's colleges and universities everywhere that need people who want to do all the things that support faculty in their work and support student success. And so fast forward, I did get my doctorate in higher adult and lifelong education. And that's where I brought my love of political science and civic engagement together with my love of learning about college student development. And I studied politically engaged college students in the 2020 election. And I partnered with Campus Vote Project, by the way, on my dissertation. And so that is kind of how my areas of interest came together. Tonight, I'm representing various pathways within education. So in my College of Education at NC State, we have over 35 different specialty areas, program areas of study, everything from mental health counseling to community college leadership, to higher education administration, educational policy. And so if you've got an interest in learning a little bit more about the different pathways, we'll definitely I look forward to getting into it. Each of those program areas of study will have their own unique learning outcomes and objectives and curriculum. And so, you know, if you've got an interest in a education field, then I'd be happy to address questions and bring those in and pull from my own experience, but also in my job, I work with master's and doctoral students of all ages and stages of life, people who are switching careers, people who are fresh out of undergrad, people who are navigating their lives. And, you know, clearly we are here tonight with the Campus Vote Project. So y'all all care about civic engagement and social justice. And I feel like, again, education is a great place to do that. And studying a field or a subfield in the education umbrella is a great place for that. So.
Great, thank you. Dr. Sydnor?
Hi, everybody. I'm going to try to remember everything that you told us to touch on, Lauren. It's going to be a challenge. So I got my master's degree and my PhD from the University of Virginia in politics, is what their department calls it. And I was tasked with talking a little bit about both the political science PhD and a master's program. And I think what I will mainly say about the master's program, unless someone has some like really strong questions or interest in it, is don't get a master's degree in political science, get one in public policy or an MPA or some of the things that the other folks on here are going to talk about. And we can talk about why that is later if anybody's interested. In terms of sort of what a PhD in political science will get you, mostly it prepares you to be a faculty member in political science at a university somewhere. Although it gives you a fair amount of, depending on sort of the track you go into, experience managing both qualitative and quantitative data, being a program manager, and sort of that type of work. And so people I know that have gotten political science PhDs and gone on to work at places that are not academic institutions have ended up at places like Pew doing polling research, at Facebook, places that are using data and data analytics in particular to like leverage something, learn something about public opinion or political attitudes mostly. And some of that, of course, has to do with the fact that I teach American politics. I study American political behavior, as Lauren mentioned earlier. And so I just know more people that are doing that. A friend of mine works at the State Department, I suppose, is another example of kind of what you can do with a PhD outside of being an academic. But yeah, I think I'm going to pause there. I'm also happy to be the person on this call that tries to convince you not to get a PhD. And so we can talk a little bit about why, things that I think you should ask yourself that I wish someone had asked me when I was 22 and trying to make this choice. So like Alex, I don't particularly regret any of my choices, but I do wish I had known a few things about how this process works, I think at some point we were asked to talk about job prospects. That's a thing that we should talk about if you're considering a PhD. And so I'll pause there and let everybody else sort of go through their information, but I look forward to talking to everybody about this.
So I really appreciate you bringing that piece of it, because that's a lot of what I would talk to my students about when I was at OU. So is this degree program actually fit what you want out of life and where we're going? So I'm glad that we'll talk a little bit about that later. But Valencia, do you want to talk about going to law school?
Yes, sorry guys. Yeah, so my name is Valencia. I am a lawyer, and I can also talk to you about, why you shouldn't go to law school. And as soon as I get my camera back on, I will. But I can definitely talk to you about the benefits of it. When my personal story is that I was basically in between. I was in undergrad, and I was in between getting my MPP and going to law school, and I had a lot of choices to make about, if I wanted to do policy or if I wanted to do litigation and go into a traditional law path. And at the time, I'm a voting rights lawyer, and election law is kind of a niche topic as it is, and so I was really just didn't know honestly which path to take. And so I did end up with my law degree. Thankfully, I like litigation, but if I didn't, I think I probably would have been just as fine getting my MPP. There's a lot of crossover with, lawyers do a lot of policy work too. I do a lot of policy work in my own job, and in addition to litigation. And so I think that there are lots of pros and cons that I'm happy to discuss. And I think law school is a really big thing to take on because it's such a specific profession that you should, be completely informed before you start that journey.
Awesome, thank you. Joey.
Hey everybody, I'm Joey from Georgia. Alex, love that you went to Emory and UGA. I went to Mercer, not Emory or UGA though, but we almost. I'm now in the second year of a Master's of Public Administration program at Harvard Kennedy School of Government. I've wanted to go here for a few years now, and I think my main advice and critique after in the midst of talking with everyone's figuring out post-grad plans, is to know why you're going to where you're going and have specific reasons for why you're making a massive investment of time and money, and to know what type of value that you want to get out of it. And then ask everyone that you are there with, or that that may be affiliated with that institution, if you're going to get that value out of it. If not, it could be a recipe for a disaster. But I guess beyond that, grad school is a great time. You have a lot of fun. You meet a lot of people, tons of great conversations, a lot of intellectual vibrancy, and just like genuine, like, great people who generally have a pulse on what they want to do and why they're there. And if they don't, then they figure it out along the way, and that's like a fun journey to go on with a ton of people. And I guess, Lauren, the one sad note I'll add is that Harvard does things differently, so they're not affiliated with the NASPA that I refer to it as, the National Association of Public Policy Schools and Administration Schools. So the MPP here and the MPA here is not like comparable to others, but I can try and speak to how other MPAs are, because our MPA is essentially an MPP.
Got it. That makes sense. Kassie.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about both of my graduate degree programs I've been in, with the context that I think is really important for my story, is that I'm a first-gen low income. I'm considered first-gen low income, which means my parents didn't go to college. My grandparents didn't go to college. I grew up really poor, frankly, and really low income. And so college in general, even like my first college I went to for my undergrad, was a lot of like, what the heck am I getting into, and making honestly some pretty bad decisions when it came to my undergrad journey. So I studied communication in undergrad because I wanted to be a journalist. I had experience as a journalist. What's an awful time to be a journalist? 2011. So it was because it's like at the time where all the small newspapers are shutting down, but they haven't figured out the digital context yet. Like, I think you can successfully be a journalist now if you are like working toward like learning how to be a digital journalist. I know personally a lot of really successful digital journalists now, but I just got hit at like the wrong time and learned really quickly that there were no jobs available. So and I went to a tiny school in Indiana called Indiana Tech. It's a really little private school that has no name recognition, frequently gets mistaken for a 2-year college in Indiana called Indiana Institute of Technology, or no, that's mine. No, that's right. It's confusing. And so I knew I needed to go somewhere with name recognition. Like, that was actually pretty important for what I was doing, because although I had excellent GPA, I had like numerable extracurriculars, like I was not necessarily a top candidate, right? Unless I could get in front of them. Once I got in front of people looking for jobs, that went well for me, but that was not great. If I couldn't get in front of them, that didn't help. And I didn't have the network. And I think that's something that graduate school can help a lot with if you don't have a network from your undergrad. And I tell people to like, one of the best perks of graduate school is the network that you can get into, especially for master's level graduate schools. I frankly just talked someone out of a master's degree in political science, because I'm like, what are you going to get out of doing a political science master's degree at that school? I don't think you're going to get anything very useful there. And so I went to Georgetown for my master's, but it's in communication, culture, and technology. It's a Master of Arts, interdisciplinary terminal master's program, which means that there's no PhD program associated with it. You are there for 2 years typically, unless you're going to school half a day, and then you're out. You can choose to like do coursework all the way through, or you can do a thesis. And I would say maybe like a very small percentage of us go on to get PhDs. Like, that's not necessarily what they're gearing toward, but the students who've gotten PhDs, minus me, I'll say I've struggled, have been really successful. Like, there are names that if you study things like political science, political communication, there are people that you probably have heard of or read their books. And so I say we're kind of like the hippies of Georgetown. Like, we're not as like, Valencia, help me out here. We don't have the prestige of the law school,
as
or
cobblestoned as as the rest of
yeah,
Georgetown.
we don't have the recognition of the law school, and we don't have the connections of like the business school there, but like still that networking was incredible. And so coming out of that program, the thing to remember with an interdisciplinary program of any kind is you make of it what you want. So I didn't know if I wanted to be a journalist or if I wanted to work in nonprofits. That was kind of the spot I was in, that I was trying to figure out for myself. And that's why this program was really interesting to me. And it actually, politics isn't in the name, but nearly every person I know who went there did something like politically related. My best friend is the digital program manager for Sierra Club, right? Like these are the kinds of jobs. We also have some Pew folks there, right? Like you make of it what you will and can and want to do with it. And I thought that was like pretty incredible. So then I took a year off. I ended up working at a newspaper making $31,000 a year. So just to let you know, that's what that looked like in 2014. And so I ended up teaching because I could make more money and they needed me. And that's when I like really realized how much I loved working with students. I had kind of figured that out in undergrad, but like really loved working with college students. And that's why I wanted to get a PhD. But the first gen low income thing comes in really hard here. I had no idea the difference between like an R1 or an R2, like what did these distinctions mean? And so I got in full ride to University of Florida and University of Texas. So both of the schools I applied to for journalism, found out nobody cares about what I cared about. They just wanted to do big data, which is not what I do. Ended up going to UT, switching into a communication studies program, which is where I'm at now. I am on year 8, which is like full transparency. Like it's hard. It's like been pretty rough for me. And the interesting thing about communication studies as compared to like political science is that it's kind of a spectrum, right? So on one end you have political science. So like, I'll kind of use my professors as an example. You have Dr. Talia Stroud, who literally has a dual PhD in statistics and political communication from Penn. And she's like one of the most impressive people I've ever met when it comes to that stuff. And then I have Dr. Josh Gunn, who is a rhetorician. So rhetorician, critical theory, right? Like not doing numbers at all, whose like most recent book is Political Perversion, Rhetorical Aberration in the Time of Trumpeteering, right? These are all within political communication. And so you kind of find your sweet spot where like I personally ride qualitative. So I like doing interviews and telling stories, which makes sense given my background in journalism, but also I lean more critical theory. So I like to like be critical of the systems that we're working with. And that's just kind of like one of the perks of being within communication studies is that communication studies is fundamentally interdisciplinary, right? Everything kind of works together to be communication, and you can't do all the bits of communication without all the parts that go into it.
Okay, and last but not least on this question, Landon.
Awesome. Let's see. So I guess just to start off a little bit, just an overview of it. I mean, Master of Public Policy, generally for most schools, a 2-year degree, really focusing on policy analysis, program management, really just sort of definitely a quantitative aspect to it, generally, which differentiates it a little bit from some other master's programs, to really be focusing on the numbers and doing some policy analysis from that. Though I think, and this is where I'm gonna, I think, spend most of my time talking, is there is many different pathways within the MPP for what you want to focus on. And so if you really want to be a user and doing some research and being a policy analyst, and that's your goal, you can definitely get that through an MPP and really taking the more quantitative course line and going through that. But if you're more in just analyzing it and not really being the producer of it, but more of just looking at other people's research, you can take more of the quantitative line that gets you at, I can understand it, but I probably am not going to do it myself. And that's okay. It really ends up where you want to go. I think right alongside that, there's a lot of policy talk all around, but you can really tailor your coursework to the area you really care about. So if you're really into health policy, you can take a lot of health policy courses. They may even have some of your quantitative courses specifically talking about health policy when going over all the stats. Same with education and with other areas as well. So you ended up getting a lot of different people also doing dual programs. So they may be doing an MPP with a Master of Public Health, doing an MPP with a law degree, and in urban planning as well. That's another area that there's some definitely crossover. And so there's that. And then I think there's also the piece of it really fits different needs based on, I think this is more difference between programs at different campuses though. So at the Ford School of Public Policy at U of M where I went, the average age was 28. And most people they were looking for, you're supposed to be a few years after. They wanted you to do a few things for a few years. There were only, out of 100, there were only 4 of us who came straight from undergrad, me being one of them. Now I can talk more about that later, but there are also MPP programs where almost everyone's coming straight from undergrad. So there is a difference between some schools and really what they focus on and tailoring the program for. So I think there's a lot of different things going on in the MPP realm. And then like Joey said, there's definitely crossover in the MPA realm sometimes as well. I mean, some schools have even started really combining the degrees to do like a MPPA and or just starting to do other stuff. So there's like lots of stuff going on in this area. But I think that's where I'll leave it for the start.
Okay, well, you started to talk a little bit about kind of prerequisites, who's in the programs, what are different programs looking like. So I'm going to start with you on this one, Landon, so we can kind of dig into that a little bit deeper. So one of the other questions that I'd asked kind of our panelists to think about or to like tell us about is, what are those prerequisites? Are there any requirements to consider as you're thinking about applying to these different types of programs? What kind of background do you have? Are there specific majors? Do they want experience like Landon was alluding to? So let's dig into that just a little bit deeper. So Landon, if you want to talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think, like I said, I think it depends on programs. Some definitely are looking for people with a few years professional experience to sort of figure out. And I guess this is where I might talk a little bit more about me. I came straight from undergrad. The reason why I really went to grad school right away, I did undergrad in 3 years and I didn't know quite what I was doing. And I gotta say, there were definitely, I think it was the right decision for me. So I don't regret going straight through to an MPP, but I definitely 100% see the value of taking those few years, working, figuring out what you're interested in. Because for me, I was sort of like, well, I don't know what my policy focus really wants to be. And that's sort of like day one MPP. They're like, what policy area are you going to focus on? And I'm like, I don't know. I like policy. I like politics. I like all these things, but I'm like, I don't really like health. Like health policy doesn't really intrigue me as much. Education policy, I mean, kind of cool, but like, I don't want to be doing that all day either. And so I definitely didn't take as much out of the program as I could if I waited a few years. But again, I think that was still the right decision for me. So I'm not saying don't do it right away, but definitely like know that there are definite benefits of waiting those few years as well. And then I think just sort of on coursework and other things, I think there's opportunity for a lot of different degrees to do an MPP program. It doesn't just have to be Poli Sci or Econ or other degrees like that. Though I would say it's generally helpful to have a little bit of background in stats or econ, a little bit of background in as taking one course even. Some programs even look for that, but they'll make sure you're prepared, especially because they have a lot of people coming in after a few years. They know how to make sure you're where you need to be on knowledge-wise. So most programs would really know course requirements specifically like that. Though it is helpful just to know a little bit about econ since you'll be diving into that at a master's level. But again, they'll get you up to speed as you need to be. I think the other good thing that's just helpful in that regard, and I mean, I think any really degree does look for this, but I mean, looking at just ability to like critical thinking and like writing, but I mean, that's pretty consistent across the board. So I'm not going to say that's special to you need to prepare for an MPP. And I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Kassie, prerequisites, requirements, majors.
So I was just Googling what it was for UT because I wasn't for sure what the prerequisites were for the PhD program at UT Austin. So for political comm, it's not uncommon when you do communication studies for people to do both their master's and their PhD straight through a program, but also there's a lot of value in not doing all of your schooling at one school because you get to work with different faculty members. So I wanted to like uplift that first, I think, and I'm guessing this is the same for political science. I think probably the most important thing that you're doing is trying to find someone who you think would be a good advisor for the work that you want to do. If you don't have someone in that program who is going to be your person, you're like low-key screwed. Like, and that was what happened to me with my journalism. When I started in the PhD program in journalism, I came to work with someone specifically. And then she left. Like literally, she tells me she's leaving as I'm coming to find apartments, and she's going to a university where she's not going to teach. She's only going to run an institute. And that really threw me for a loop, because then I had no one in the journalism program who was interested in what I was interested in. I wanted to talk about how local journalism impacts rural communities' political engagement. That was like my thing when I first started, right? Like that's what I wanted to do. No one in journalism was like, I honestly was like right before Trump's, everyone's like, that's not sexy. You're not going to get published. And this is like a very R1 attitude, by the way, of like publish or perish, like, which means like you need to get into these academic peer-reviewed journals. So like, that's why I switched, frankly, is because the institute, the Net Strauss Institute for Civic Life, which is where I was working, where this person was the former director, did have other associated professors in communication studies. So I knew they would have interest in what I was doing. And so I went through and I talked to all three of those communication studies professors with the help of a really trusted government professor who helped me kind of find the right person. I got lucky that I had made that connection in my first semester to make that switch. So just like find your person is my first piece of advice. Other things that are sometimes requirements, GRE scores. So that's sometimes a requirement, although luckily since like pandemic, more schools are saying we don't care about GRE scores anymore. So that's like going away. And then writing samples are huge. So for communication studies and for my communication, culture, and technology master's degree, you didn't have to come in with a specific program as your undergrad or your master's program, but they did want you to say why you wanted to be there. So your writing samples were really important, both your actual sample of writing that you turned in. So here's like, if you did a master's thesis, that's what you would turn in for your PhD program. I didn't, so I turned in something different. And then I think someone's calling to ask me about answering a survey for the election that's going on. And then the other piece is like your statement of purpose, why you want to be there. And that's when you declare, like for me, I was like, I would really like to work with Dr. Hart. Originally was who I thought I was going to work with, right? I was like, this person seems to be doing the things I want to do. He established the institute, right? That was like for me what helped me decide. But ultimately, I know people who have MPPs and MPAs who came into the comm program for my bachelor or for my master's degree. Actually, like probably the most interesting is communication, culture, technology. Someone has a bachelor's from MIT in microbiology, came in, did her master's at the CCT program, and then went back to MIT and got her PhD in microbiology. But she just wanted to be able to talk to people about how microbiology works. And that's why she did her master's with us, right? So it's just incredibly interdisciplinary. Again, like obviously the master's is meant to be that way, but comms is that way generally.
Okay, same question, Joey. Prerequisites, requirements, majors for MPP.
Yeah.
Or sorry, MPA.
So one, generally every grad school publishes like a class profile. All of them are for the Masters of Business Administration programs and the public admin, public policy. And that's like where you want to start to see what types of students they accept. And it'll have their age, range, gender, where they're from, aka is it a domestic school, international school, or like a combination of the two, and their major. And there's normally a place for like career outcomes, which is a good way to see, you know, what types of industries are they going into. And so then like you can already like know, like, you know, like for me, I didn't necessarily want to go work in a small local government in the state of Georgia or in the Southeast. So it kind of ruled out the UGA's program, certain tracks of it that they have for their policy school, even though it's one of the top in the nations. That's where a lot of their strong network is. But back to the actual question itself, requirements for our program was like 5 to 7 years of work experience. And if not, you had to have a reason for why you were applying, and you didn't have that. And the admissions team would tell you it's probably a waste of your time if you did apply and you didn't fit within that range of what they intentionally included on the website. 2 was a GRE score. Full transparency, I'm the worst test taker in the world, and I did absolute dog mess on the GRE. And I was like, I'm a terrible test taker, but I walk the walk and I do the work, and here's what I've done. And they were like, okay with that. And it showed a competency in being able to handle like the quant side of all this work based on my past work experience, and had like humility like within that, of course. And then the last part, and I think is like, you know, depending on like the competitiveness of the programs, like what is your value add and how are you different, and like what are you going to bring to a community of learners, which is a thing that everyone has to like figure out for themselves. But that's what makes like having a community of folks that knows you and like will read your application, and folks that have done it before, just, you know, even more important. Like when I was applying, made a gut decision to apply, and just had like 7 people who were helping me like write my application, reviewing it on Google Docs, making little comments here and there. And I got to a point where I was like, you know, too many cooks in the kitchen. Half of y'all, you're out of here. The original 3, you're staying in, because y'all aren't mean to me about your edits. You're kind of nice, and thoughtful. And I guess like the one thing that I really want to underline here too is, your class is your network, and that's like what you like want to go into, and that's like literally what you're paying like thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars for. It's not just to like sit in for a few classes every single week. It's to like develop a community with like fantastic people, and you want to meet them and like engage with them, and you also want to know what is like who else is actually in the program, and who are you going to be in the program with. And how are you going to learn from them and add to their learning as well.
Awesome. Valencia, I know law school has lots of prereqs and things that you have to do as you're thinking about getting admitted. So if you want to talk about some of those, that'd be awesome.
Absolutely. And I'll just start by saying a lot of law school is choosing between the school, like if you want to take a more regional law school track, or if you wanted to go to a national law school, and that really does decide a lot of sort of future choices. As problematic as I think that is, it's true. I will start with saying my LSAT score was also really mediocre, and I honestly, I took a year off, but I also graduated undergrad in 3 years. And then I took a year in between law school and undergrad before I went to law school. And I used that year to sort of, I did a Fulbright, and I really leaned into that year to sort of like beef up my resume and to bolster my application, to sort of fill in the gap that was left behind with my LSAT, because my LSAT score was not competitive at all. But I really leaned into like getting like excellent letters of rec, which are required in a lot of law schools, especially sort of the national ones, Georgetown being one. And my resume, like showing my breadth of experience, like life experience. And then my personal statement, actually, and I told this to a lot of undergrads that are applying law school, when I got my Georgetown acceptance letter, the dean of admissions hand wrote on my acceptance letter, like, Valencia, I loved your personal statement. It really moved me. And so I took that to mean that it probably put me over the top in my admissions. And so I cannot stress enough, like using those other factors. If your test scores aren't where you prefer them to be, or your GPA isn't it where you prefer them to be. Like those qualitative like requirements can be very can put you over the top at the end of the day, where your GPA or your LSAT score, isn't, closer to the average. Mine was like definitely under Georgetown's average, like solidly under it. I'll say that. And so the other factor I think is very similar to what others have said, which is the breadth of like the network that your law school provides. So we always say, in law school, like, be careful who you burn bridges with, because that person could be your judge. And it's really true that like everyone, like the legal community is relatively small. If you go into the public sector, it's like even smaller. And so that translates into, there's a huge, like, how can your law school help you tap into that huge network that you're spending a lot of money to be a part of? And then another factor, going back to that regional versus national, law schools offer different things different law schools offer different things in terms of career opportunities. Some law schools invest a lot into the public sector and making sure that lawyers aren't just private big law firm lawyers, but are also government lawyers or nonprofit lawyers. That's one of the main reasons why I went to Georgetown, actually. And others don't have like that strong of an investment in that. And so if you are someone who wants to go to law school and wants to stay sort of in this space of like a civil rights, voting rights space, after law school, you should go to a place that is going to invest, that has the resources to help you navigate that career space. It's very tough to get into the public sector as a young lawyer, because the nonprofit industrial complex is pretty competitive, especially at a certain level. And you want a school that's going to invest in you and the time and like in your career path personally. And so I always tell folks, if you're looking to be in the public sector, see what a school has to offer in terms of social justice programs or racial justice programs, or just generally career services that are oriented towards government or public sector services, because that's going to, with very few exceptions, the sort of like resources your law school provides to help you become a public interest lawyer is really directly tied to like your success in the public sector as a public interest lawyer and your ability to get those jobs. It's like the fellowship. There's a fellowship process after law school, and navigating that I would not have been able to do without my law school. Actually, just like career services actually literally like guiding me through the interview process, and a lot of law schools unfortunately don't have that. Those tend to be sort of like the state law, like schools that are just underfunded or just focus primarily on private sector, because frankly, like private sector folks make more money and can donate back to their schools. So those are the three big ones. I think also a big misconception with law school is that you have to be a litigator, you have to go to court if you want to go to law school, and that's like the only pathway you're kind of stuck in. But there's actually a huge policy and lawmaking focus in law school and like your legal career after law school that doesn't require litigation at all, or doesn't require you to do litigation at all. And I encourage folks to explore that as well. A lot of mine, I said earlier, a lot of the work that I do is policy based, like drafting legislation and proposing it. And that kind of work is not necessarily advertised as a law school path, but it is what lawyers do, particularly lawyers in the public sector. We do a lot of work that is non-litigation in addition to, filing lawsuits. So and it's also why a lot of folks, I think someone mentioned earlier, Landon, I think mentioned earlier that a lot of folks get like dual MPP and law degrees. It's actually pretty common. But yeah, I think other than that, another something that's a benefit that wasn't a benefit to me when I was applying for law school is that more schools are starting to take the GRE instead of the LSAT. And so you can use that to your advantage insofar that you're sort of like in between. So you're making that sort of decision, like, do I get my master's degree or do I go to law school? And you take the GRE and you take the LSAT, and one score is better, you can use the better score. Using the better score would be a strategy that I would think about. That's starting, I think, especially since the pandemic, schools have been a lot more holistic in their admissions process. And so focusing away from the LSAT, which is pretty like a pretty big change from years past, where for a lot of folks, your LSAT score kind of made or broke your application, but that's starting to change. So I would focus a lot on sort of those other factors as well.
Awesome. I don't know about everybody else, but I just really appreciate all of our panelists kind of talking about multiple different aspects as there's been so many good nuggets of advice through all of this, like, Kassie talking about mentorship, and I'm like, I want to dig in more to that, or I want to talk, more about networking and what that looks like within your class, like one of the things that Joey uplifted. And like it just it's very exciting. And so like, I know we don't have like a ton of time, so I'll get to this question on the last our last two speakers, but then if y'all have any questions, feel free to start typing them in the chat or raise your hand whenever we're finished here, if you want to kind of have some more targeted questions for our speakers. But Dr. Sydnor, if you want to talk a little bit about prereqs and requirements and things like that for political science.
Sure. I mean, I think Kassie hit a lot of them because most PhD applications are pretty similar, and sort of grad school applications more generally. And so I don't want to sort of rehash all of that, but I want to give a couple of, I guess, recommendations about things to keep in mind as certainly as you're looking for a PhD program, but things I think might be applicable to others as well. The first is that you should get a PhD if and only if it is being paid for by the institution, right? If you are not getting tuition and most of your tuition covered, a living stipend, a stipend you can actually live on, right? Not just something that you're going to have to then come and find another job to do to like make ends meet. That's key. And so don't go to a program that won't do that for you. I think sort of building on what Kassie was saying earlier, it's really important but you want to apply to schools where there is someone who is doing work that both you could see yourself working on, but that also could clearly mentor you on the kinds of research questions and projects that you would like to do. And that should really ideally be like 2, 3, 4 people. If you can find a collection of people, then you don't run the same risk that if one of them leaves, you're stuck at this place where no one else does the same thing that you do. And that's easy to say now, right? It's hard to find, right? I was really lucky at Virginia that there were 3 or 4 different faculty that I was happy to work with. One of the 4 that I sort of initially noted left in the first year also. So it ended up being good that was not the route I ended up taking. But it worked because I had these other people there to mentor me instead. As you're thinking about, right, so I said go somewhere where the PhD is paid for. And we talked a little bit earlier about research, like R1 schools versus other schools. Most of the time an R1 is going to be the kind of school that's going to pay you. It's going to have the stronger programs. And while I don't think that ranking matters as much for PhD programs as it might for, say, law school, and Valencia can speak to that perhaps a little bit more, it does matter, right? Going to UT or to UVA, I think signals something different even than going to, right, UNT or other schools that are more regionally known, but don't have the national recognition. And that matters when you are one of, right, 120 people all applying for one of 30 something jobs in your sort of year that you're trying to get an academic job. So we can talk a little bit more again about job prospects later, but the other sort of important piece about that R1 designation is that it's going to typically get you farther in terms of an academic job afterwards. And I hate saying that, but it's just also sort of the reality of how this works. The final piece I'll say in terms of sort of prerequisites or things to consider is that most graduate programs have some sort of visit once you've been accepted, right? They have you come meet other PhD students in the program. You get to meet with the faculty that you think might be able to mentor you. You get to see the campus, et cetera. And really take advantage of those. If you had asked me, right, I got into 3 schools. And if you had asked me before I visited all of them, which I would have gone to, it is not the one that I ended up in. And it was partially I was trying to, like Kassie, decide between, like, what do you do with political communication? It's this interdisciplinary field. Do you get a communication degree? Do you get a political science degree? I chose political science, but the comm program I got into was a better ranked program. But I wouldn't have known that the political science program was a better fit had I not visited and talked to people there. It was kind of like, I think it was maybe Landon that was talking, or Joey that was talking about health policy and like not being that interested in health policy and realizing that as you got there. The comm program had a lot of like, we can talk about health communication. And I was like, I don't care about that. I care about politics. So yeah, so the point of that was to take advantage of visiting opportunities, talk to current students. Yes, right. Like it was so great to get to talk to people that were in the program and hear what their experiences were like. And, you know, did they get along with each other? Were they cooperative? Did they like do things together socially? Because this is for PhD, right? This is probably a 6-year minimum commitment. You got to like these people, like they are your social network. And that can change a little bit depending on sort of other connections you might have in the area or a spouse, et cetera. But certainly you want to sort of keep that in mind as you go. So I'll stop there, but.
Okay, and before I have Dr. Kappus go, I want, because Joey has to leave a little bit early for something else. So there was a question in the chat about gap years, and if you took them, what positive experiences did you have that gave you guidance? And, you know, some of you have started kind of answering, but I want Joey to be able to answer this a little bit since you had several years and since your program also kind of dictated that. So like you might talk about what you were doing in between your undergrad and your grad experience before you pop off.
Sure. Thanks, Phil. Sorry, I'm going to do my first Diwali celebration with some friends. So it'll be a lot of fun. Gap years, I hate the term. Love it between high school and college. But after college, it's like, no, like go do what you want to do and like what your career is. So for me, I like followed my passion, and my passion was helping young people vote. And to do that, I started a social impact consulting firm with one of my best friends, and we worked for a few groups and one philanthropic grant making foundation, and helped create national organizations. And what did we do? Like we did everything imaginable to create a project and enact it that involved talking to hundreds and hundreds of people and like convincing them to do something really niche and narrow. And we like tried and we failed and we succeeded and then we like failed again. So I guess if I can really like sum that up in 1 to 2 sentences, start a career. Try if you're lucky enough, which, you know, if you're part of this community, I think you are one of those people, start a career in something that you can see yourself in for a long time, and then surround yourself with people that actually, you know, have the audacity to care a little bit and are willing to have a real conversation with you, which is so normal in the higher ed space. It is not normal in many other spaces. So folks in higher ed are very intentionally friendly and very intentionally will give back to you. Folks in other arenas will not always do that. And so you just got to ask and be intentional about it and kind of put yourself out there. But you have folks to like fall back on day after day. And that took like 5 years total, I think, 5.25 before I went back to it. And the reason I wanted to do it then is I found myself loving finding and enacting and kind of implementing solutions to like problems in the US democracy, but I did not love being someone in like a maintenance role of something that I knew would work and that I knew someone would be far better at, and it admittedly drove me crazy. So anyway, that's why I left my 5 gap years if I can.
Awesome. Thank you for being here, and I hope you enjoy your celebration tonight. Okay, Dr. Kappus, talk a little bit about requirements, majors, degree, type of prerequisites for education. And I know that that's very broad because there are lots of different paths.
Yep. I'll do this quick. Okay. The biggest thing to know about any graduate or professional school application process is that it is vastly different than undergraduate admissions. Undergraduate admissions, there's a centralized admissions department that reviews all the different prospective students, no matter what they want to study, right? It's a machine. Graduate admissions and professional schools, they, yes, can get hundreds and thousands even of applications for a specific program, but they really do try to get to know the student on paper. They really try to get to know you. Your personal statement, therefore, is incredibly important. I love what Valencia was talking about in her time, was just about the importance of telling your story and how it complements and makes sense for what you think you might want to do in the future. And it's okay if those plans change once you get into the program, but they do want to know, make it make sense for them, right? And keep in mind, these are faculty like Dr. Snyder who have devoted their lives to their field. So what do you think they want? They want people who are committed to those fields, people who they think will have longevity, not just applying to something on a whim, right? So really demonstrate that you've done your homework by personalizing your personal statement to the programs that you're applying to. Do not have a cookie cutter personal statement that you just send out to all the different law schools. Why specifically this law school? What is it about their curriculum? What is it about their commitment to racial justice? What is it about their faculty that draws you to it? I'll drop in the chat. I have a list of like my top personal statement 101s. Go to the open houses, go to the info sessions, reach out to faculty members. You can do that. You might get ignored, and that's fine, but you may have a faculty member who reaches back out to you and says, let's hop on a Zoom call. And guess what? That faculty member, if you have a positive impression, could advocate for you in a admissions decision. Do not, and I repeat, do not ask questions that you can get from the website. What are the admissions requirements? It's on the website, y'all. Look at the website. What are the kinds of jobs that people do after this program? That's something probably not on the website, right? Or you can say, oh, I see there's some alumni highlighted. What's your job placement rate after this program? That's a great question to ask, right? Remember, you're interviewing them. I know you want to go to, everyone wants to go to a well-regarded school, top ranked, whatever, but you're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you in this process. And so do your homework about the programs, what they value, who they are as a program, so that when you get in the program, they support you, right? You can ask the hard questions. How do you support students with minoritized identities in your program? Ask the question. I saw in the chat a question about interviews. I had an interview for my master's program, and the one thing I remember about it was a group interview where we all sat around a round table, and the faculty member at the front read out a scenario, and we had to solve the scenario as a group. Guess what? The scenario didn't matter. They did not care what our solution was. They were watching to see how we interacted with other people. And what I'll never forget is there was somebody who became my classmate who was sitting at the end of the table and had not said a word, a little more introverted. And I pointed it out, and I was like, hey, I don't think Liz has contributed Is there anything you'd want to add? Right. And she was like, thank you so much. I'm a little more introverted and it was hard for me to jump in. So just keep in mind, there's all kinds of things they may do in an interview situation. Doctoral programs are most definitely going to require, most of them, a writing sample or some kind of written statement that shows your academic prowess, if you will. Does that mean you have to be a published author to apply to a doctoral program? No. Find your best paper from a class and maybe correct the errors that your professor pointed out and turn it in, right? That'll probably do it. And then life experience, y'all. We've said it in the chat. Valencia hit on this one a lot. They don't want cookie cutter people going into their programs who've just had their nose in textbooks. Get out there. And guess what? I'm preaching to the choir because y'all are the kind of people who are out there. You're with the Campus Vote Project. So I know you're out there. So demonstrate that you are the people who are out there. But also be okay with having some life experience in between school, because that's going to help you stand out. And better yet, it's going to help you find the right program for you. Last point is on funding. Keep in mind, meet the early application deadline. In order to be eligible for the best funding opportunities in graduate programs and professional schools is meet the first deadline, because that's when they're going to start reviewing for financial considerations. If you're planning to go into a helping profession or the public sector, I would highly recommend trying to find funding, graduate assistantships, research assistantships. There's funding out there, grants, fellowships, because you don't want to go into hundreds of thousands of debt if you plan to be a mental health educator or be like me, working in student services. Like, I do fine, like more money than I ever thought I would make, but I'm not getting rich. I can tell you there are people with undergrad degrees who make way more than I do, and I have a PhD. So think about how can you secure funding. That's a big piece of the search process.
Yeah, so I know that so the question about the gap years or taking time, I think a number of you have answered this in the chat, but does anybody want to kind of expand on this a little bit more before we kind of move on to another question? Any comments? Okay, so a lot of the things that we, just that they uplifted were, do something that you want. This is a time to figure out what you do and what you don't want. Make sure that you're getting paid for the work that you're doing. Live your life, get all of the experience that you can. And so I think those are all, really positive things, because I can tell you from personal experience, I also took a gap year in between my undergrad and graduate program, mostly because I didn't think that I wanted to do any more school, and was going on a path to try to do something in the military, and it didn't work out. And, my mom was like, you're working at home at your parents' restaurant. Like, you need to do what is your path? Where are you going to go? And what are you doing? And so she's like, you either need to get a real job, or you need to go back to school and kind of figure this out. And so I'll just, tell you a little bit about my experience. I started in an MPA program, but I did not finish in an MPA program. I finished in a Master's of Adult and Higher Education, which ultimately led me to working on a college campus for over a decade, doing, kind of programming, core services, working in student affairs, that type of stuff, which is what allowed me to do work with college students on voting. And so I was able to kind of navigate this path to something a little bit different, even though I started in a degree program that I didn't finish in. I mean, I think MPAs are wonderful. It just wasn't the right fit for me. And I figured that out about halfway in. So like, I didn't ask all the right questions. I didn't know what I was doing. It was during, the financial crisis in 2009, 2010. And so there were no jobs. And so everyone was going back to school because that was the only option. But this piece about funding, I think, is really important too, because ultimately I was able, and not in the beginning, but I was able to secure a graduate assistantship on campus, which helped pay for, like, I got a stipend and a tuition waiver to do that work. And then where I was working on campus through my master's program hired me after my graduation. There was someone that was leaving, and that's ultimately where I stayed for a decade. And so that was a really important piece of kind of my journey, but also, like, it's okay to decide partway through that that's not the path for you, and kind of try to figure out and make pieces kind of fall in. So there was another question. I know Dr. Kappus started to talk about interviews, but I think the question was kind of specifically geared towards law school interviews. So Valencia, if you want to talk a little bit about what that experience is like specifically for law school.
Sure. So I'll start with the law school, and then I see there's another question about, attending a T14, which I can answer with both of the, like, in the sort of like same category. So law school interviews are actually, they occur usually after the application process, and they don't and sort of before they're about to accept you. So so in the case of Georgetown, for example, I didn't get an interview because I got accepted without an interview, but oftentimes they'll be, particularly for applicants who apply later. I applied like really early, and so I think that contributed to why I didn't need to interview. But for a lot of the applicants who apply later, they tend to have to go through an interview process right before they get accepted. And sometimes there are individual interviews, and sometimes there are group interviews, which I thankfully did not have to go through, but I have heard that they're very intense because you're with like other applicants in a group setting. And the interview process is essentially like a conversation. I think you put it you're basically in a position where they want to accept you, and they just want to know a little bit more about you. And so that's how sort of you should position yourself in the interview. And I would, if you're in the interview process of a law school, talk to anyone and everyone you can that has also done that interview successfully. And you can usually find that you can usually ask the law school to help you find someone in that network. But in general, law school interviews are not necessarily a given. Like, oftentimes you're accepted into law schools without having to do an interview at all. And so to answer someone else's question about attending a T14, I think it's just all of what I said earlier sort of applies. If you have a great LSAT score, fantastic. You're gonna probably get into one of the T14s, but if you don't, and you are looking to get into one of the top law schools, it's really a matter of, building your case through your more qualitative application materials, really in particular your personal statement. And if the law school has the right example, and definitely through your resume, and just sort of showing the law school why they're a good fit for you, and exuding I am interested in this sort of scholarship that whichever law school is working on, or this clinical program, or this study, or this professor, and that fits into my goals, and sort of why you and the law school basically would work together. I will say, just to add Alexander's point, it is true that it's those things can change. It doesn't have to be something that you stick to for the next 3 years. You're not beholden to whatever you put in your personal statement. If your career changes in the middle of law school, that's fine. But it is it's good to make your case as far as your interest in what you know at the time. And then and I apologize for rejecting the premise a little bit, But also deciding whether or not you're going to T14 really depends on a couple of things. So they're all really expensive law schools. These are all like 6-figure law schools, and this is going to be like a very expensive education that you're investing in. So what does that law school offer you in terms of not only scholarships, but loan repayment programs? So the benefit of a T14 is that they have the money to give you those types of resources. And they typically have loan repayment assistance for alumni after graduation. And so what sort of like loan repayment assistance are they providing you if you are going into the public sector is one factor. But also, is it worth it for you and your goals to go to T14? Because if you, for example, wanted to live, let's say I'm from Louisiana, and let's say it was always my goal to like only be in Louisiana forever and work in Louisiana, just only work in Louisiana and never move. It wouldn't have made any sense for me to not go to Tulane. Like I should have gone to the top law school in Louisiana if I was going to stay there forever, because very similar to what others have mentioned today, law schools have a regional, or like the legal profession has a regional bias. So it does help to get into the job market at a regional law school. That's the benefit of non-T14, but regional law schools, is that you are entering a local job market with much more ease than if you went to a T14. Like, it's cool to say like, I went to Georgetown or I went to Yale or wherever, but if I'm trying to enter a hyper local market, I would have you would rather go to a law school that is also hyper local and will be able to give you the career you want from that in that market. As far the job market for T14s, which are all almost exclusively national law schools, with the exception of like UT, which is like sort of like a quasi-national, like has best of both worlds, I guess, in that respect. But like the job market is sort of more open. It's also more national focused. It's also focused on like big law firms or the big nonprofits, like federal government work. And so the opportunities that you would be given at a T14 are just different than if you were to go to a regional law school. So I think we overvalue T14s in that way, insofar that we just, people attach their the name of the law school to the value of the law degree. And they're willing to incur debt for it. And it's like, if you're willing to, but if you know for a fact that you have no intention of like leaving your area, then there's actually a diminished benefit in going to a top law school. You're better off going to a lower ranked law school but that's still high ranked. Like a UGA, for example, if you're in Georgia, is still quite high ranked. Tulane is really, it's like just under T14. I think they're like number 20. These aren't like bad law schools, but like they're not in the like little club, but they'll give you the opportunities regionally that you're looking for. And so just to sort of like poke up the premise of getting into T14, just think about also what you want to get out of law school and your future career as well.
Yeah, before I go to Kassie, I just want to make this point that kind of just underscore what Valencia is saying here. I had a student who was looking at law schools and kind of thinking about what her career path looked like moving forward. And, she got into Georgetown, but she ultimately ended up going to UT Austin because that's where her family is. That's where she wanted to be. That's where she wanted to work. And UT is also not a, terrible law school. Like, it's very good. And she wanted to work in Texas, and that's where she was going to be. And so the kind of financial aspect of that too, and really kind of making decisions on where she was going to be, I think was really important for her. But it was hard. She struggled for months to try to think about, like, do I apply to both? Do I not? Like, what does that look like? But ultimately that was kind of the deciding factor for her. Yes, Kassie.
Just wanted to add, and I just realized this. Without knowing it, I applied and got into 2 of the top 3 journalism PhD programs in the country for public schools. But this is like the most first gen student thing that was like, let me Google journalism PhD and see what pops up. So that is not because I was like out there trying to hustle. It's because I didn't know what else to do. And that's what people were telling me to do. But I think in the same vein where Valencia was talking about like regional matters for law schools, I think something similar really happens in PhD programs, not regional, but what are you interested in studying, right? So if in journalism, for example, if you're interested in visual communications, what does their visual communications team look like? What are they doing? Is there only one person there, but they're really amazing? Like, do you want to stake it on that? Kind of like what Dr. Sydnor was saying, or is there like a robust program? Like, so at UT, what's really interesting is we have the Center for Media Engagement and we have the Annette Strauss Institute for Civic Life, right? So if you're interested in, I mean, again, I was told after the fact that ASI is where dissertations go to die. So like maybe there's some truth to that as I'm on year 8. But you know, those were things for me that meant that I had community and connections, right? So now I'm connected to people across the country, really, where if I want to work on this issue of youth civic engagement, because I'm part of ASI, I have that connection, even though I'm not there anymore. If I want to do work around civility and news, the Center for Media Engagement has like multiple scholars who are working for it. And so in the same sense that at T14, you're choosing, do you want to do national work or do you want to do regional work? I think within graduate, like Poli Sci, Poli Comm, journalism, anthro, sociology, psych, all of those kinds of spots that all kind of relate to one another. Check to see if there are institutes or civic center or centers that are doing that work that you are personally interested in, because it means that there's an investment in the idea on that campus. And so you'll get more connected. Again, networking is like everything. And in my opinion, like I don't have this job without networking. I didn't apply to this job. They made the job for me because of the networking I had put in, right? Like networking is everything.
Yeah, I mean, great point. So there was another question, and Dr. Kappus started to answer this, but do you think it's helpful to submit the optional materials? I think this is specifically about law school, but there are, you know, additional materials that you can submit with any job application or, you know, other degree programs. So is that helpful, having a DEI statement, having a, you know, other things beyond just your personal statement? Does any of our speakers want to talk to that?
Yeah, I'll echo what Kassie just said in the chat, which is yes to additional materials if you put effort in it, and if you actually have something to say, right? Like, don't write a DEI statement if you don't have something to say about diversity. And that feels very obvious, but I think there's a tendency, right? Like I got asked to write diversity statements when I was applying for faculty positions, and I had specific examples to give and had reasons to include that. But I have now, on the other side, having read faculty applications and things like that, right? You get them from some people and they either haven't put a lot of thought into it, or they don't actually have contributions to diversity and inclusion, et cetera, that they can talk about. And it's not helping their case in that case. And so if it is truly an additional material, think about what value added is this going to give the admissions committee to help them understand me as a whole person and a person that they want as part of their community. And if you don't think it's going to help you in that space, don't do it. But in most cases, I think it will.
I think that's like the perfect example of when talking to current students is a really good idea also to understand like what they did or what they didn't do. Because I'm thinking for CCT, we had the option of turning in like a digital component, like a personal website, a video, statement of interest. I didn't do it because I don't do well on camera. And so, but like others did, but it would have been some of the stuff that got turned in because the students actually got a pretty huge say in who got to come into the program, made me not want to bring those people in. Some of the stuff was amazing. And I was like, yes, I want you here right now. But some of it, I was like, why did you even do this? Like, you just wasted my time. And so don't make people feel like they're wasting their time by reviewing your materials.
Yeah, I just think it's like if you have something to say, it's a way for you to again show what your commitment to the program, but also, you know, why you add value as a marginalized person to the school itself. And so it's just another way to bolster your application in a holistic way, but also don't be that person who doesn't have an identity by which to, you know, just, you know, that might fall under a DEI appropriate essay.
Yeah, so I want to go back to this conversation about going straight from undergrad to grad school, because Landon has alluded to him having a different experience. And so I want him to kind of, I guess, share a little bit about why he made the decision to go directly into, you know, his master's program, and then what benefit that was for you specifically. So yeah, a lot of us are like, we took gap years, but you didn't. And how has that shaped your career path and the work that you were doing in grad school?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think so if it's still left unanswered, which I can talk about here in a minute. But I think this is also an interesting conversation to be part of, because I made a lot of mistakes in my process of grad school, in that, like, I recognize I wasn't doing what I should, like, now, and mostly at the time. I think most of the things I'm like, I know this isn't smart, but this is what I did anyway. And I think as a good example of that is, I think sort of going back to when I was thinking about grad school is, well, it was my third year, so I hadn't been an undergrad very long. I didn't know what I was doing. I was 750 miles away from home, and I was just kind of doing my thing. And neither of my parents really went to college. My stepdad did, but was always busy with work. So there was sort of that push of like, very much like some first gen things going on there too, in that, like, I didn't really know. And I was just very scared of what the next step would look like after graduation. And I think that fear really made me like, I need to figure it out. And looking for a job is just more scary, because I'm like, my family's from Michigan, that's where I live, that's where all my family is. I went to school in New Jersey. Like, where am I going to go? What am I going to do? Like, I graduated high school 3 years ago. Like, it's not like, I was just like a little bit of panic. And I think from that, I was like, well, grad school seems like a safer bet. And I don't know if that's the case looking back on it. I don't know if I thought it then as well, but I mean, it was secure at least. But now here's the mistake, because I also thought, I was like, oh, I want to go back to Michigan. So I applied to one grad school. If you're going to grad school, do not apply to just one. It's not a good idea, even if you really want to go there. But I do say that with the, I wanted to go back to Michigan, and Michigan State's deadline was a month after I would have found out about the University of Michigan. So I still had a plan, but again, that's not the way you should be thinking about going to grad school. It shouldn't have been about, I want to go back to Michigan, so I'm going to apply to grad school like that. I could have moved back to Michigan without going to grad school. Like, there was no need for grad school to be part of that equation and applying just to one program. But that's what ended up happening. And then I think the other part of the question is sort of the benefits and what I've gained out of that. One is, I do think like, looking back at where I was coming out of undergrad, yeah, I mean, undergrad was great and helped, but I did gain a lot during grad school as well. And I think having it, both of them right afterwards, and still coming onto the job market, like, fairly, like, having not those, but like fairly young still, I feel like this is going to help with a lot of opportunities for upward growth, hopefully more quickly. And I think part of that for me as well is just interest in public office. And interest in doing that at a fairly young age compared to most elected officials. And I think having the policy background of the MPP is going to be really helpful in navigating that and being able to get there. And also just in electoral politics, I think hopefully a little bit of credibility with voters as well, and actually being able to say, I know what I'm talking about. So for me, that was some of the things, though I think it's not necessary. I think I mean, I guess, let's see. I guess as an example, I don't think it's necessary as in, anyway, yeah, we'll leave. Basically, here's what it is. So even after that, running for local elected office, but yet there's another candidate in the same county as me running for the same office who is 20 years old and hasn't finished a graduate degree and is currently a trustee for his village. So definitely not necessary to do that to get there. You can definitely do it without having a degree. You don't need a degree to run for office. That's not the way it's meant to be. But anyway.
Yeah, no, I think those are all really important points. And so I know we've got like 2 minutes left and I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So I think we should just go around and give final words of wisdom, nuggets of advice, anything that we didn't talk about, and drop that here now. So I will let y'all decide which order you want to go in, because I know that this is like a last minute thing and sometimes that takes some time to wrap around. So if y'all want to jump in just to close us out.
I'll jump in. I'll give the pitch for education, y'all. It's an amazing field. We need people who want to study K-12, colleges and universities, teaching and learning, adult learning. Education is the engine of our democracy. And so if you care about our democracy and you have an inkling, you think you might enjoy things like being a school counselor or being an academic advisor or working on ed policy, because we know there's plenty of problems to fix in that area. We need problem solvers in the study of education itself, how to make our education system more socially just and our democracy more inclusive. And so that's my pitch, to consider the various specialties and subspecialties in education, specifically studying education, right? Everybody here has gone through grad programs that are technically in education, but they're studying like political science. But you can study political science and then decide you want to teach college students political science, right? And so there's lots of possibilities. The bottom line, I hope your biggest takeaway from tonight is that you've got to do your homework. Really investigate the programs. Go be a nerd, like look up the faculty members, watch their YouTube videos, like what do they study, what do they care about? And yeah, look them up on social media. This is your opportunity to really dig in and learn as much as you can on the front end, because none of these places are perfect. I can say it while I'm wearing my institutional swag. We are not the perfect place. What I love about where I work is that we are striving to be our best selves. We're striving to advance racial justice. We certainly have not arrived in that area. But you want to get to a place where you're going to feel supported, whether this is a 2-year master's program or the 5 to 7 year ordeal that is a PhD program. And the bottom line is you can do this. If this is something that you've got an itch for, you know that college wasn't enough and there's more left in the tank, and you want to investigate some problems and get some specialized training, go for it and reach out. Campus Vote Project's doing some really amazing things, and you've got a support unit built in, and you've already expanded your network tonight by being a part of this or by watching this recording. So reach out to us. I'm sure they will share our contact information. So
Thank you.
I've got two. One is, I think, a relatively short point, but one that I did not know when I applied for PhD programs. In most cases, if you go into a faculty role in most social sciences and humanities fields, at least we'll say, you're not picking where you live. Like if I wanted to stay near, my family is in Virginia. I grew up on the East Coast. My friends and I went to college. Like I went to college in DC. There was not a conversation by the time I got to applying for faculty jobs about like, oh, I'd really like to stay in the DC area, and that's totally feasible. It's not. I'm very happy in Texas. I love Southwestern, but I did not know as a 22-year-old that I was signing up for a career in which I could end up anywhere in the country, and it was just going to have to like be where I landed, essentially. That's not totally true, but it's pretty close. There are not a lot of jobs, and there's not a lot of mobility between jobs. And so you want to just sort of keep that in mind when you're thinking about what it is that you want out of your position after graduate school, if you're like thinking about PhDs and faculty positions in particular. The second piece that I again wouldn't have changed my mind, but was something I wish people had talked about, is just, again, like, it's a 6-year, PhD is a 6-year plus commitment with a bunch of very highly motivated, very specific, even at their best, still pretty competitive people. And there is a sort of mental health toll that comes with that it doesn't mean that, right, you shouldn't do it if you sort of struggle with any of those things, but it just means that you want to have a really sort of solid plan, I think, going into, and think really carefully about what your strategies are for handling stress, for handling anxiety, for handling, right, any number of things. And some of that can be really easy, right? I played intramural sports really intensely for 6 years because playing softball with my friends was a way to deal with, right, the sort of issues that came with graduate school. But I watched a lot of friends really struggle with getting through the PhD, with writing a dissertation, with the isolation that comes with a program that, like, no one's telling you what to do every day. You have to get up and do this on your own. And that can be wonderful if you are sort of, you know, in a good place. But when you're tired of the project and struggling to find motivation, it can be a really tough experience. And so I just think it's really important to say that up front, to think about what this sort of looks like and what it means. And again, to talk to graduate students, to talk to other people that have been through the program, not just faculty members, right? We're the sort of like survivors. And so, right, my experience is very different from that of people who have gone on to make other choices. And I think that's just really important to put out there.
I'm gonna hop next because I'm literally living the thing that she's talking about. And I wanted to crawl under my desk as I said it. But my point relates deeply. So in my master's program, literally best time of my life. And I don't know that I want to attribute it to Georgetown. I want to attribute it to my program. Like, it was remarkable. And it was because of the community, because we were interdisciplinary. The folks in my program were not directly competing with one another. So I was in for a rude awakening when I came to UT. I was like, what the hell? Like, frankly, I was very shocked by it. And so that community building is so essential, right? Like, my maid of honor is someone I met at Georgetown. That's like not very long in your life to have like built that kind of a relationship, right? Like, and so the community building around doing things like intramurals, I've played intramural football and soccer at Georgetown, right? Like, those kinds of things. Again, we talk about networking, but that community building is huge. And so, like, for me, because I am very weird in what I study, so I study education, but from a political communication standpoint, not very many people are doing it from the way that I do it. I have not had that community at UT, and that's made it exceptionally difficult for me. But the cool thing is, and like the reason I started the research collective, right, is so that we can start building this community together. So you can find those resources outside of your university if you do get stuck in that situation. So for me, probably the most important person on my committee when it comes to actually helping with my dissertation is not a person at my school. It is Dr. Nancy Thomas, who's at Tufts University. She does NSOLV, is what most of you guys know her for. She's the person who's the most helpful on my committee because she's the person who knows the most about my topic. And so, but I got her to be on my committee because of the immense amount of community building that I did during my time at UT, outside of UT. So you can still make that work, even if it's not perfect on the campus you're on.
Awesome. Last minute thoughts, Valencia or Landon?
Sure. I'll also jump in real quick. I think just on top of what everyone else has said, I think law school is extremely isolating, and it's very competitive, and just overall a very intense time. I actually didn't like law school that much. I love my job. I love being a lawyer, but I like my law school like was fine. I think but like in hindsight, I got through it because of the people that I like clung on to, and we're still like great friends today, and like sort of like battle worn, have that in common kind of thing. And I love them like dearly more than some friends that I've known since high school, you know? And so having a plan for your mental health is pretty crucial. It's just a very isolating time. It's just a very isolating, particularly the first year of law school. It's a humongous learning curve that you're tackling your first year, and it's like learning a new language, and having sort of a plan for your mental health. It'll be reflected in your like law school application process as well. And then I think the other final thought that I wanted to get to earlier was what while you shouldn't be selective necessarily with your applications, don't just apply to one law school. I do think, you know, particularly if you're cash strapped and like resource strapped, law school applications are extraordinarily expensive. So I would be extremely smart in how and where I apply to. And like a lot of that goes into the research you do, into like the type of programs that law schools do, like into the type of programs a law school has and sort of the reputation a law school has. But if you're spending, you know, X amount per application, I think I spent like hundreds of dollars on law school applications that I probably just wasted that money because I was just sort of like throwing darts at the wall to see what stuck. And there's a smarter way to do that. And that would have been with more research into the actual programs. I was like letting myself get accepted into schools and then choosing, when I should have probably narrowed my choices into like, really, where do I want to go and where do I see myself, and investing all of my like time in my application and like just building like the best applications possible and just pouring my soul into those instead of like just trying to get volume out there and spending probably too much money on my applications and probably too much time on too many of them. All of that time could have been spent on like less than a handful of them. So I will just add that. Just work smart, not hard on the applications front.
Awesome. Landon, close us out.
Yes. So just a few things. I think one is like prioritize the research of looking at schools. Actually like focus on the application process, studying for tests outside of the GRE or whatever test you may need to do. I think looking back at my last year, I was running way too many student organizations, doing way too many things, leading the debate team, like too much, in that I didn't prioritize it. And I think that goes to my next step in why I made some of these quote unquote mistakes. And I think that leads me to the point of you will probably make quote unquote mistakes as well. And that's okay. We've all made it here. And I think in chat, like everyone was saying different things that they wish they would have done differently. And it's not probably going to go perfectly how it could or how you might imagine. And it doesn't need to. You can still get to a really good place. And maybe even that's the better place for you than if you did it the way you thought. Things always don't work out the way we think, and it's okay for that to happen. And I think that also goes along with the mental health conversations we were having as well. We're talking about all these things that you should be doing, but if you don't have capacity, these are like the things that like are ideal. And if you aren't able to network as much as you are, I mean, I was in grad school during the pandemic. It was not, networking did not happen as much. Also, just generally, that's something that's a little bit more difficult for me and does tax my mental health quite a bit more. And so something I generally don't do as much as others. And I know I'm losing some benefit there, but that's okay because I still took a lot out of grad school. And yeah, maybe I could have taken a little bit more, but that's the capacity I had, and I still took benefit, and it still put me in a better place. And so do what you can. You're going to make mistakes, but it will be okay. You get through at the end of the day, and just make sure we're taking that time and thinking and prioritizing to make sure you're making the best decisions along the way as you can, though.
Well, I think that was the best way that we could have wrapped up. So I just want to thank all of our speakers for being here, all of the wisdom, advice, everything. I can't wait to push this out later for others to view the recording. And I'm going to try to take all the chat kind of notes as well. So thank you all. Have a good night.